As the little girl approached the soldier to give him a penny, she was not prepared for what she saw. They said this photo was about giving something to a U.S. soldier. But the truth was shocking. In southern Afghanistan's Helmand province, troops from America and Britain entered Marja to destroy the Taliban's largest haven. They also sought to restore government presence in southern Afghanistan. Resistance was sporadic and fierce as troops seized positions around the area. Stricter combat rules and a concerted effort by the Afghan government and NATO forces were aimed at not only protecting the civilian population, but planning for the aftermath. Building infrastructure support and trust in an area long dominated by the Taliban. Collected here are images of the country in conflict over the past month, part of an ongoing monthly series on Afghanistan. U.S. Army Private First Class Danny Conley of Camdenton, Missouri, assigned to Delta Company 4th Brigade Combat Team. 250,882nd Parachute Inventory Regiment receives flowers from an Afghan girl during a patrol in the Arghandab Valley in Kandahar Province, southern Afghanistan, February 24, 2000. An Afghan girl greets a joint patrol of U.S. troops from the Charlie Company 287 Infantry, 3rd Brigade Combat Team and Afghan National Army soldiers, and Kandalai village in the southern Afghan province of Kandahar. On August 8, 2011, while U.S. troops launched missile attacks on Taliban targets in nearby Kauai village, killing at least 3 and capturing 2 insurgents. U.S. forces pushed their counterinsurgency efforts to battle for the hearts and minds of the local population. We may be 2 weeks into the new year, but it's not too late to reflect back on 2011, especially when it comes to photographs. Facing the reality of war reminds me of a saying my mother repeated often: the deeper the well that sorrow digs, the more happiness it can hold. It wasn't until I was an adult that I realized my mother was paraphrasing a quote from Khalil Gibran's book, The Prophet. Your joy is your sorrow unmasked, and the self-same well, for which your laughter rises, were oftentimes filled with your tears. And how else can it be? The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. The joy of the barefoot girl above, as she received a pair of shoes, I hope she got the pink ones, is counted by the sorrow of the little girl, pictured below, who has lost her father. The end of 2011 also meant the withdrawal of all combat forces from Iraq. Here's one little girl, happy she got her dad back. The U.S. military reported its biggest day of evacuation flights out of Afghanistan, and by far on Monday. But deadly violence that has blocked many desperate evacuees from entering Kabul's airport persisted. And the Taliban signaled they might soon seek to shut down the evacuation. 28 U.S. military flights ferried about 10,400 people to safety out of the Taliban-held Afghanistan over the 24 hours that ended early Monday morning. A White House official said, the chief Pentagon spokesman, John Kirby, said, the faster pace of evacuation was due in part to coordination with Taliban commanders on getting evacuees into the airport. Thus far in going forward, it does not require constant coordination and deconfliction with the Taliban, Kirby said. What we've seen is, this deconfliction has worked well in terms of allowing access and flow, as well as reducing the overall size of the crowds just outside the airport. With access still difficult, the U.S. military went beyond the airport to carry out another helicopter retrieval of Americans. U.S. officials said a military helicopter picked up 16 American citizens Monday and brought them onto the airfield for evacuation. This was at least the second such rescue mission beyond the airport. Kirby said that last Thursday, 3 Army helicopters picked up 169 Americans near a hotel just beyond the airport gate and flew them onto the airfield. President Joe Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, said at the White House that talks with the Taliban are continuing as the administration looks for additional ways to safely move more Americans and others into the Kabul airport. "We are in talks with the Taliban on a daily basis through both political and security channels," he said, adding that ultimately it will be Biden's decision alone whether to continue military-led evacuation operations beyond August 31st. In a reminder of the urgency felt amid a dizzying array of security threats to the evacuation effort, the Pentagon posted a video of a laser near the airport targeting a U.S. Air Force C-17 aircraft and apparently attempting to disrupt the pilot during landing. After more than a week of evacuations plagued by major obstacles, including Taliban forces and crushing crowds that are making approaching the airport difficult and dangerous, the number of people flown out met and exceeded us projections for the first time. The count was more than twice the 390 flown out in the previous 24 hours on U.S. military planes. Army General Stephen Lyons, head of the U.S. Transportation Command, which manages the military aircraft that are executing the Kabul airlift, told a Pentagon news conference that more than 200 planes are involved, including aerial refueling planes, and that arriving planes are spending less than an hour on the tarmac at Kabul before loading and taking off. He said the non-stop mission is taking a toll on air crews. "They're tired," Leon said of the crews. "They're probably exhausted in some." On a more positive note, Leon said that in addition to the widely reported case of an Afghan woman giving birth aboard a U.S. evacuation aircraft, 2 other babies have been born in similar circumstances. He did not provide details. The Pentagon said it has added a 4th U.S. military base in New Jersey to 3 others in Virginia, Texas, and Wisconsin that are prepared to temporarily house arriving Afghans. Major General Hank Williams, the Joint Staff Deputy Director for Regional Operations, told reporters there are now about 1,200 Afghans at those military bases. The 4 bases combined are capable of housing up to 25,000 of evacuees, Kirby said. Afghan evacuees continue to arrive at Dulles International Airport outside Washington. A bus carried some of the latest arrivals from Dulles Airport to another site for what could be one of many processing stops before they reached new homes in the United States. Exhaustion clouded the faces of many of the adults. "How does it feel to be here?" a journalist asked one man. "We are safe," he answered. An older woman sank with relief onto an offered wheelchair, and a little girl carried by an older boy shaded her eyes to look curiously around. It was an interim stop for what had been a grueling struggle over days of what for many of the get flights out of what is now Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. The scramble to evacuate left most arrivals carrying only a book bag or purse, or a plastic shopping bag of belongings. Some arrived for their new lives entirely empty-handed. Biden said Sunday he would not rule out extending the evacuation beyond August 31st, the date he had set for completing the withdrawal of troops and British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Plans to press Biden for an extension to get out the maximum number of foreigners and Afghan allies possible. Biden is to face the U.S. G7 allies in a virtual summit on Afghanistan Tuesday. Taliban spokesman Suhail Shaheen, in an interview with Sky News, said that August 31st is a red line the U.S. must not cross, and that extending the American presence would provoke a reaction. Since the Taliban seized the capital August 15th, completing a stunning rout of the U.S.-backed Afghan government and military, the U.S. has been carrying out the evacuation in coordination with the Taliban, who have held off on attacking under a 2020 withdrawal deal with the Trump administration. Monday's warning signal to Taliban could insist on shutting down the airlifts out of the Kabul airport in just over a week. Lawmakers, refugee groups, veterans organizations, and U.S. allies have said ending the evacuation then could strand countless Afghans and foreigners still hoping for flights out. Since August 14th, the U.S. has evacuated and facilitated the evacuation of about 37,000 people. A firefight just outside the airport killed at least one Afghan soldier early Monday. German officials said it was the latest in days of often lethal turmoil outside the airport. People coming in hopes of escaping Taliban rule face sporadic gunfire, beatings by the Taliban, and crowds that have trampled many. This wasn't the first act of kind for our great soldiers. Video shared on social media shows a crowd at the Kabul airport look on Tuesday while a woman is helped over a wall by American soldiers. A journalist working for the Rise to Peace nonprofit organization captured the moment, and another clip shared by the group. A U.S. soldier lifted a girl over the wall. Afghans have flocked to the airport this week, desperate to flee after the Taliban seized control of Kabul. The militant group has promised a more moderate rule than when it controlled the country 20 years ago, without a parliament or elections, leading to a strict interpretation of Sunni Islam. They ban women from attending school or work, or even leaving home without burqas. They also cut off the hands of thieves, stoned perceived adulterers, and persecuted, and sometimes massacred ethnic minorities. Afghans now are leery of what the Taliban are calling a new era, and the Taliban's assurance of a safe passage to the Kabul airport has been contradicted by reports of violence and graphic images, including one showing a woman with a child with blood on their faces, apparently unconscious. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters Tuesday that officials have received reports of people being turned away, pushed back, or even beaten as they try to access the airport. Is there a relationship between poverty and conflict, including terrorism? Does poverty have an effect on security globally and/or nationally? Soldiers don't seem like they have an obvious connection with poverty. But in fact, soldiers are often involved with poverty-related issues, and often in poverty-stricken areas. For example, British military engineers were sent to Sierra Leone to fight the Ebola outbreak by building a medical treatment center. Former U.S. Marine Corps Platoon Commander Jake Harriman served in 4 deployments in South Asia and the Middle East and Africa. Through his personal experience fighting the war on terror, Harriman was convinced that poverty was a contributing factor to the cause of terrorism. Harriman has commented about his realization that poverty and conflict are interconnected and his subsequent departure from the U.S. Marine Corps. We fought side by side on the front lines of the war on terror, a war that has caused so many lives, including many of my closest brothers. But as we fought together in that war, I came face to face with an unnecessary evil that takes more lives each day than are lost in Fallujah, Gaza, Kandahar, Mogadishu, and Jaffna combined. An evil that is directly connected to the proliferation of the terrorism and insurgency that we were fighting. The evil of extreme poverty. In the U.S., budget funds that are allocated to foreign aid are divided into military aid and non-military aid. Like diplomacy, food assistance development. In 2012, over 80 admirals and generals wrote a letter to the United States Congress, discouraging a decrease in the international affairs budget, and reaffirmed the U.S. national security, along with military intelligence, depends on diplomacy, development, and humanitarian efforts. Echoing that sentiment, in a poll surveying over 600 active duty and retired military officers, a majority believed that increasing aid for non-military tools, such as food assistance, support for education, health and economic development, would help us national security. From their personal experience, 70% of soldiers confirmed that non-military tools help to make their job more efficient or effective. Thus far, we may not have the answer to whether there is a causal relationship between poverty and conflict, as the relationship between poverty and conflict is obviously complex. We can't make sweeping statements connecting the two at this time. However, according to the opinions and actions of military officials, poverty seems to play a critical role in making conflict a thing of the past. Even our officer helped the needy ones. Captain Kelsey Borsinos just arrived in Hawaii to serve with the 25th Infantry Division in September. But before she could settle into her new assignment, she quickly found herself at the center of a controversy regarding her hair. Two senior enlisted leaders blasted her for having what they saw as unauthorized French braids. The problem, she was in the right and wearing her hair in accordance with new hair policies set for women 5 months ago. Military.com spoke with 8 women serving in the Army across different units and bases, all of who have similar stories of mostly male senior leaders telling them their hair is out of regulation, or that they disapprove of their hairstyle, despite fresh Army guidance granting women more flexibility with braids, ponytails, and highlights. The Army is at a cultural turning point as the Force and Defense Department as a whole aims to make the military a much more inclusive force. For civilians, simply allowing a braid or ponytail might sound inconsequential. But for women serving, the change in hair policy was largely seen as Army leaders for the first time listening to women, who the force is increasingly reliant on and breaking away from its tunnel vision of catering to men. The updates were praised by the Army's rank and file, especially among some 181,000 women serving on active duty, the Reserve and National Guard. Marcinos, a signal officer, started wearing her hair with 2 braids during her time in the captain's career course at Fort Gordon, Georgia, when the Army updated its uniform and grooming regulations in May. Not a single time was I asked or questioned about it. That's why I was so caught off guard, Marcinos said in an interview with Military.com. Yet when Marcinos was at a patching ceremony, an event that welcomes new soldiers to the division, a male command sergeant major told her that her braids were unauthorized. She said the sergeant major told her that her braids had to come together to form a single braid, and incorrect interpretation for the rules that allow women to have 2 braids. Given Marcinos was familiar with regulations on women's hair, she was confident she was in the right, but told the sergeant major she would double-check the policy. Later, a second male command sergeant major was quick to pile on with a false correction. There was another sergeant major who was just standing behind me and waiting for me to start walking to my car, and he approached me, introduced himself, and told me my hair wasn't in regulation, Marcinos said. He told me that the rag is clear in black and white, and that I needed to set an example. I don't expect people to know every regulation, but I do expect people to ask if they don't know or do the research before making the corrections, she said. The following day, she emailed the 2 sergeant majors and attached the updated policy, noting that her hair was indeed authorized. But the 2 men dug in their heels, emailing her that they were tracking the policy and that she wasn't following it. Now they're just choosing to ignore it, she said. She now carries the regulation at all times. I think it's an older generation not wanting to conform to change. Neither command sergeant major is in Marcinos' unit, and she says she feels supported by her chain of command. The incident spurred a quick probe from the 24th ID Inspector General's office, which concluded the braids were authorized according to documents reviewed by Military.com. The division's public affairs also posted the changes for women's hair to social media in a short campaign to educate the force after the incident. Given some of the divisions, most senior enlisted leaders seemingly weren't aware of it. The way Marcinos sees it, if an officer can catch flack from senior leaders, even when she provides the regulation, That is a red flag for how women more junior might be treated in the ranks. And if leaders are going to nitpick policies and be wrong, that raises questions on whether they can handle larger challenges. It sounds silly because it's hair, right? But having the experience I had, I think about someone's ability to lead. If we're stuck on someone's hair, how are we treating people on bigger issues? She said. The regulation exists for a reason. We don't get to pick and choose what we follow. I'm worried about how more junior female soldiers are treated, giving women more flexibility. The Army's new set of long-anticipated revisions allowed women to have more comfortable hairstyles that make them more effective in training in combat and reduce the risk of injuries, migraines, and hairline damage associated with constantly having hair pulled back. The changes included allowing women to keep their hair in a single ponytail, 2 braids or a single braid, twists or cornrows that may come together in 1 or 2 braids or a single ponytail. Braids and singular ponytails may be worn down the center of the back in all uniforms. There's no minimum length. But a ponytail or braid may not extend past the bottom of the shoulder blades while standing at attention. Women can also have highlights in their hair, so long as the highlights are a natural color. The changes were widely covered in the press, including military.com. As reported by major national papers, cable news networks, and the Army's own press release, as well as multiple posts on social media from top leaders. That being said, the text of the changes seems to be clear. There was a lack of female representation in a force-wide brief with military.com on changes that was provided, but they included every single type of style in the amendment to hair policy.